Welcome. Oh, sorry for that it took a while. Beth and Gijs cannot be here. Gijs has the party of his daughter, the birthday party. So he's like walking around and taking care of all kids. And Beth could also not be here, so I'm sharing today. And the last but not least, the last meeting but not the least presenter is Dan today, and you will talk about your project. It's about narcissism. It's about the far right. You have, well, usually you would have like 15 minutes, but you can take a bit longer because you're the only person presenting. So I don't know, how long will it take? 20 minutes? More or less, yeah. Half an hour. And then we will have half an hour for the questions. Yeah, I don't know whom to thank, but maybe we can make things work later on and Beth can do it. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. So in the next, let's say 25 minutes, I will talk about the results and the lack thereof of my past, let's say 10 months. What I was doing research about is basically integrating the theories of political psychology and political sociology in explaining populist radical right voting, more specifically how subjective status threat triggers or activates different status-related traits in populist mobilization. So the main question is if personality traits are stable, and we assume that they are stable, and PR support are unstable over time, then how can we explain PR support with personality traits? And we face the same problem in political sociology that predicts that people who are left behind or who are marginalized, who experience social status loss and so on, so these people tend to vote for the PRR, or populist radical right. But the problem is that it's actually not necessarily true, because these people may vote for the populist radical left, or they just don't vote, or they vote for the mainstream parties. So basically what we were focusing on is, as I mentioned, what sort of personality traits are activated by social status threat or status loss in explaining populist radical right voting. And as narcissism is the trait that is most closely related to status seeking, as well as to vigilance for status threats, I investigated the patterns of both vulnerable and grandiose narcissism in explaining PRR voting. So political sociology discusses PRR voting in within the theme or label of grievance theories. There are basically two big groups: economic and cultural grievances. So whereas economic grievances say that economic vulnerability makes people easier to convince, so makes it easier to convince people about elite malfeasance and about the conspiring elite who doesn't represent the people. Cultural theories or cultural grievance theories claim that it's mostly cultural threats that lead to populist voting. Sorry, and basically the two types of theories are connected by a third group of literature, which is about education and educational status. So just quickly, economic theories claim that during the years of globalization and of neoliberal capitalism, the social status of the workers' class basically, well, the workers' class basically disappeared, or it was exported to the Far East. So both these economic processes, as well as the emergence of the ethos of individual competition, led to the dissolution of traditional classes. And this is what the so-called wealth paradox posits as well, that basically it's both the lower and the middle class who experience status loss and hence who vote for the populist radical right. So basically it means that only economic frameworks cannot explain populist radical right voting. but it's actually also the cultural frameworks. So cultural framework, so it's cultural grievance theories come from the fact that actually there was a confluence of economic and cultural changes during these 80s, 90s. So basically, the institutionalization of multiculturalism and of gender equalities led to a threat of the conservative notion of social status, and it resulted basically in a cultural backlash. So people who experienced an economic status loss actually perceived it as a cultural status loss, and they felt that the elites don't represent the traditional people, don't represent the majority, don't represent the they don't represent the rural people, but they give rights to minorities, whereas the majority would be entitled to these rights. So as I said, education is the link between the two because it predicts both economic and cultural capital, and in this way it's one of the strongest predictor of social status. And in Bourdieu's theories, cultural capital is strongly related to habitus, which is a term which is similar in sociology as personality is in psychology. So both habitus and personality describes enduring behaviors and attitudes. Both of them are shaped by the environment, and both of them has implications for social status. So here I try to collect that what can be the PR habitus, or populist radical right habitus. And basically what I found is that, as I mentioned, it's built around the majoritarian identity, so that they try to safeguard the traditions of the majoritarian population. They have a strong attachment to the locality, and accordingly they are characterized by high in-group conformity or right-wing authoritarianism, high out-group derogation or social dominance orientation, because they're protecting the in-group from the out-groups, and preference for the status quo, so traditionalism and conservatism. So basically, they don't fear their social economic status, but they fear their dominant group status that they fear entitled to. Or in other words, they experience a sort of envy towards the out groups who might threaten their well-deserved status. Experiencing this craving for the status that is under threat is predictive of aggressive narcissistic tendencies. Accordingly, narcissism is related to homophobia, racism, and sexism. And basically, this is the bridge to the populist radical right personality. So previous literature have linked PR voting to disagreeableness, to openness to experience, and to neuroticism. Disagreeableness is the most strongest predictor of PR voting, and actually Baird and colleagues actually demonstrated that it's the anti-establishment or the negative element of populist communication that triggers or activates disagreeableness. Openness to experience is related more to the right-wingness than to the populist radical part, and neuroticism is mostly related to the vulnerability, the economic vulnerability experienced by PR voters, and I assume that it is the threat message present in the populist communication that triggers neuroticism. More recently, grandiose narcissism has been linked to AfD voting on the Gaze's panel. More specifically, it is the rivalry, so the disagreeable component of narcissism, and not the extroverted admiration component. So what is narcissism? Narcissism is a really complicated or complex personality traits that has two types. the grandiose type that consists of extraversion and disagreeableness, and the vulnerable part that is neurotic antagonist, neurotic disagreeable. So actually disagreeableness or antagonism is the common denominator between the two types of narcissism. And I claim that it is actually vulnerable narcissism that predicts PR voting even in the cases panel here, although it was not measured because only grandiose narcissism was measured. So I ran two studies. And the first one is a correlational study based on the cases panel as well, that uses psychological network model. Psychological networks represent variables as their nodes, and the association between two variables as the network edges. So if there is an edge between two network nodes, that means that these two variables are associated with each other over and beyond the effect of all the other variables. And if there is a third variable in between, that means that these two variables, that the shared variance between the two variables are explained by this third variable. Furthermore, if there are two different paths graphically, that means conditional independence, conditional independent mechanisms in the real life. So what I looked into is both this mediation, so what is the complex interrelationship between personality traits and status variables, as well as a sort of moderation. So I checked how the narcissism populist PR voting relationship depends on different objective and subjective status variables. So what I found is this complicated network, but I will explain it. So basically what I found is that there are two main pathways between envy, which is a proxy for subjective status threat, and PRR voting. The first path is this one. It's the neurotic, and I would say that is the vulnerable path that is characterized by also economic vulnerability. So the red line shows that it's negatively related to income. So they score low on social economic status. And it's actually authoritarianism that mediates the effect of envy to PRR voting. The other is the middle class path. We know it because it's not related basically to any to the social status variables, and it's xenophobic hatred or hatred towards the minorities that mediate narcissistic rivalry to PRR voting. So more simply, there is the vulnerability that is mediated by authoritarianism to PRR voting, and rivalry is mediated by xenophobia to PRR voting. Furthermore, I found that the first pathway is moderated by realistic or objective threats, so like basically by income or by education level, whereas the middle class or the rivalry one is not moderated by objective status, only by subjective status threat. So yeah, here we can also see the moderation effect. What's important here is that the subjective status, so the envy variable, is necessary to turn narcissism into PRR voting, because if there is no envy, then the relationship between narcissism and PRR voting is zero in 5 out of 6 cases. Whereas there is no such a pattern with the objective status threat. So, oops. So yeah, I will skip this. So to confirm our findings, we ran an experiment, which was a between subject experiment. What we did is basically we first measured grandiose as well as vulnerable narcissism and demographic variables. And after that, we asked the participants to place themselves on a social ladder. So this social ladder describes the society by education level, income, as well as by values. And what we did is that we assigned people either to the high social status or the low social status group. After they gave their subjective status level, let's say 7, if they were in the high social status group, they received a message that the ostensible group average is lower than their social status, whereas here they were told that the group average is higher than their status. Obviously, this group average was not true; it was manipulated. And after that, we measured propensity to vote to real populist and non-populist parties, as well as to imaginary candidates. And after the manipulation here, we had a manipulation check where we asked people in 5 different questions if they feel appreciated by other members of the society in terms of their financial situation, educational attainment, and so on. And what we found is that the manipulation probably didn't work because basically in the whereas in the pre-treatment status, so in the subjective status, most of the people scored around 8, 9, or 10. So most of the people felt that they are high status. After the manipulation, most of the people said that they feel that it's more or less in the middle. So these are the 5 different domains and the mean of it. And basically, there is no manipulation effect in terms of the manipulation checks. What we also after this, I tried to look into the relationship between this subjective status and the different voting variables. And what I found is that there is a stronger relationship between a mainstream party vote and subjective status, not way strongly, but more strong than with the populist radical right. And what I also found is that there is in the PR group, there is both a high and a low status group. So basically, this proportion is somewhat higher than this proportion. So it also sort of confirms that there are like the poor, more materialistic voters, and there are the cultural voters who are high in status. And after that, I looked into the main effect of the manipulation. And yes, and what I found is that for the populist parties, there was no effect at all. So basically, it didn't matter if someone was in the high or in the low status group, while there was a significant effect for 2 out of the 3 mainstream parties. Furthermore, this effect was opposite. So if someone was primed with low status, then they were less prone to vote for these parties, the mainstream parties. After this, as you saw, I also checked the interaction effects, and I estimated different models. In the first round, I estimated separate models for the vulnerable and for the so for vulnerability and for rivalry, not including the other type of narcissism in the regression, and I found no patterns at all. So basically, what I found is that, as we expected, rivalry as well as vulnerability are positively related to PR voting, but almost at the same amplitude, they are related to mainstream voting as well. So probably, at least for the first part, probably people, no, actually for both, people who are more narcissistic tend to vote more, or tend to they want to be represented and it's not actually PR voting, but voting that is positively related to narcissism. After this, I included also I estimated models that included both types of narcissism, as they were quite strongly correlated. So the correlation between the two was around 0.6. And what I found is that the results are not significant, but there are different patterns. And these patterns are sort of plausible. So what we can see, let's say here, is that vulnerability has a positive effect on populist voting if someone is primed by low social status, whereas priming someone with low social status decreases the effect of rivalry. So actually, people who are more disagreeable and not neurotic but disagreeable, their propensity to vote for populists decreases by a status threat. And for mainstream parties, we can see the exact opposite effect. So people who are primed with high status, their vulnerability increases the chances to vote for mainstream parties. So actually, these results sort of make sense, but they are not significant. You can see the regression itself here. Basically, nothing related to the. So this first one is the populist, and the second one is the mainstream. Basically, nothing related to the manipulation. So the group is significant, but almost everything related to narcissism is significant. So so we can see that narcissism is related to populist voting, but it is also related to non-populist voting. And the last slide is interesting, mostly because of the effect of disagreeableness. So as in the network, I showed that the effect of disagreeableness was fully mediated by narcissism. So here in the experiment, we included a lot of different disagreeableness or agreeableness items. And what we found is that the effect of cynicism stayed significant even after controlling for both vulnerability and rivalry. So actually, cynicism is the part that is not covered by narcissism, but is still covered by disagreeableness. And beyond that, actually, authoritarianism and traditionality or traditional values is a strong predictor of PRR voting. So basically, that was it. And if you have any questions or if you have any comments that can help me, feel free to add. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Questions? Rebecca.
Thank you very much. It's super interesting. I have a lot of questions. I'll start with one. Narcissism. When I read the title, I was thinking that you probably use a different scale. So I am quite curious about the grandiose and vulnerable narcissism, because I'm thinking of this as like on a very individual level. Do I think I am the best? But I know from other literature on far-right voting that they're often looking at collective narcissism as like the group mechanism. And I'm wondering if maybe your results are not that perfect and not significant, because it's really about losing status and feeling narcissistic about my group, and not so much about whether I think best. So I was wondering if you have tested with collective narcissism as well.
No, mostly because that part of literature is quite widely researched. But so there is a moderate correlation between individual and collective narcissism. But actually, it was not narcissism that was not predictive, but it was the status threat.
But you would have expected a significant interaction.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, but
Okay, I got what you're saying.
so basically I thought maybe you would only have a significant interaction if it is collective narcissism, because then losing the status of the group would be, so I think it's like maybe the personal one, it would be, could you be excluded from the group? You know, could it be just not your whole group losing status, but you are not a member anymore? And yeah, I don't know. It was just like one of the thoughts, because this collective narcissism is
Yes,
very
thank you.
everywhere at the moment, and I agree.
Thank you. Yeah, I will think about it.
It's really cool.
Yeah, on the status threat, I was wondering, you said you used envy as a proxy for status threat, and I'm not very familiar with how widely that is used as a proxy for status threat. I was wondering if what the idea behind that is, that status threat always leads to envy, or what?
Well, not always, but this is the most closely related emotion with status loss and status threat. There are some. It's really slow. So there are some literature in organizational and work psychology, and there is also proper political and social psychology literature about the relationship between the two constructs. Yeah, I think this one of them is this paper. So basically, triggering feelings of status threat generates envy. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if that's always the case, or maybe if that's why there were no significant results. If you have a group that you are maybe polarized with, or you dislike, whether you feel the same kind of envy for them as you would for other people, or in organizational context. Maybe that's something.
In the experiment, I didn't use the envy. It was only the first study.
Ah, okay.
But can you elaborate on that? That if
it just caught my attention. I don't know if I would think that right away. But I hadn't seen those studies before. But you would have that a status threat would lead to envy if you have other feelings attached to the opposite group that you are comparing your status to. I don't know if that is always like a direct result. So I was thinking.
Well, for me it was convincing, but yeah, it's a. So first, I was looking for different variables that can capture status threat, and I found this. And then I looked into the literature, and I found that the two are connected. But I think I get what you're saying, that it's that you have to be involved with someone, or you have to identify with something in order to feel envy when someone is higher in status, right?
Yeah, that also envy to me always comes alongside some kind of wanting to achieve that same level, or wanting to be in that same group, which I don't know if you really dislike the opposite group, if that would be the case. Like if you have I guess radical right supporters, and you are scared about your status loss, but you don't necessarily want to be in the elite, I don't know if you would still feel envy in the same way. But I'm just.
But you wouldn't call envy if I have something and I don't want to give it to you. Because basically this is what I try to proxy, that they have the dominant group status and they don't want to share it with, let's say, women or refugees or any other outgroups.
And so they feel envy when they lose that dominant status?
Or they feel Yeah, for me, this is the emotion that comes to my mind first, that if I don't want to share something with you, then I'm envious, but maybe it's not the proper emotion. I don't know.
Yeah, because I don't know, there's something for me that's missing there, but I also can't give you another emotion
Yeah.
to replace it. So I don't know what to explain it.
It was nice to see your presentation of the work you've been doing over the past year, because I've heard bits and pieces. So it was really great work. I was wondering if maybe the stimulus that you used just didn't actually do what it was intended. So perhaps people just genuinely didn't feel a stimulus threat when they were going through it. So it doesn't mean that your prediction might not actually be happening in real time, but that you couldn't capture it.
Mhm.
I was also wondering if you had an intuition about why this result might have come about. Like, what are your first thoughts?
Well, the first thought was that it didn't work. Then the second thought was that, okay, but it did because something happened for the mainstream parties. And actually there are some patterns, even not significant, but there are some patterns even for the PR parties. So what I was thinking about is that, well, there was a feedback on a conference, that maybe a 1 to 10 in the Dutch population is not the right thing, because below 6 everything is from the school, everything is a failure. So basically everyone was between basically 6 and 10. The other one is that there are different types of status, and status is mostly employment related, but I looked into the different employment groups and I didn't find significant results there either in the manipulation check. So yeah, probably there are some differences in the concept of status between the participants and between us. I don't know why it didn't work.
I have one question that Beth has asked. He has several questions. I will start with one. You seem to assume that personality is the cause of politics. Does the German panel data allow you to disentangle the two? So could it be, for instance, that being a PRR supporter increases your narcissism the other way around, perhaps under conditions where your status is activated?
Yeah, what I think is that it's more, so like personality is more stable than PR support, but yeah, it's an assumption. Probably so there is it can be the case that being part of the AfD voter group increases envy, for example, but in this, so if we assume that the order of the variables is correct, then it's probably not PR voting that increases authoritarianism, that then decreases education, for example. But obviously, yeah, there is a chance that being part of a group makes you conform to the group norms, and if, for example, devaluation on aggression is a group norm, then it can work in that way as well.
Yeah, also, and that would be a question for me. I really liked your, so you talked about personality and Bourdieu's habitus, right? And you connected the two, which I thought was really interesting. Because, but maybe I'm wrong. For me, personality has a very stable connotation, whereas habitus is more something that is constantly in development, right? Something between an individual and something broader, something that is changing all the time. So for me, that was interesting that you basically, yeah, that you said that the two are two similar things from different disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
So to what extent do you think that that narcissism and the components of narcissism are changing all the time because of the connection with the environment?
I think it can. Well, so on the one hand, I think that if someone faces narcissism as a problem in himself or herself and goes to therapy, then it can be reduced. For example, I think that it's also important, but I think that also the So I think that competition itself is something that increases narcissism. It's not proven scientifically, but in my subjective opinion, rivalry is something that is rewarded, let's say, adaptive behavior in our society, even though it can hurt a lot of people, but it's easier to win a competition. So I think that if someone gives in to individualism or to compete with others, then it can easily increase narcissistic tendencies, even aggression.
Yeah. A related question for Beth is how independent the two dimensions of narcissism are.
The vulnerable and so that they are
rivalry. Yeah.
So in the sample, it was 0.63, the correlation. But at the same time, they cover different things. So it's a bit similar to empathy and mentalization, that they are strongly related, but they actually cover different things.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So you find different connections, although they are strongly connected to each other. Rebecca.
One thing about the personality, I would say in psychology there is going away from it being stable. So a few years ago there was a whole trade theory talking about this idea that people have a spectrum of narcissism or extroversion, and that they work within the spectrum. So I would say they also think it is changeable. Maybe not in like the big move, but there is a movement within weeks even that people change things. But because we're on this network, I find it really, really interesting, and I love networks. I think it's a cool way to look at stuff, and especially if you have attitudes as nodes. The way you described it, you said, I think the pink, or it looks for me like pink path, is the working class, maybe, and the green one is the middle class. I'm wondering if you can actually make this assumption, or if you would need a different way of looking at it, in the way of splitting up your sample either beforehand and saying, if I expect this pattern in the working class, I should only find this path, or if you, in the middle path, I should find the other one. Because I see from a theoretical point where you would think the people on this side are the working class, but cannot someone in the working class also have these other attitudes on like an individual level? You know what I mean?
Well, it's an average. So these networks are mostly for exploratory analysis. So I cannot set anything before. It's not like a structure equation modeling. I just throw all the variables in. I tell it what sort of distribution they have, and it just plots it. So I agree. Probably there are lower class people who score high on xenophobia. Actually, we can see it. There as well, that both of them are connected to xenophobia. What can be seen is that there is more right-wing and authoritarian. I just cannot see anything because of the. But yeah, so that this purple or pink or whatever is a bit more related to traditionality, to national pride, to conscientiousness. So the more right-wing type of people, and they are more. I would explain it that it's more like the system justification theory sort of voters. So those who just don't. So economically vulnerable people who don't feel that it's possible to fight the system because they just don't have enough resources. So to alleviate this cognitive dissonance, they try to convince themselves that the system is just. Whereas the other type of people, let's say higher middle class, they are not actually threatened, but they still feel threatened. So they are this sort of people who feel that they have the well-deserved position, and they just don't want to compete with anyone. They don't want anyone to come in, and I think that it's. So both the social economic part and the psychological part are sort of plausible or logical.
Yeah, I think I struggle a bit with like saying these are two different types of people, because you just have an average across the sample. So if you would split your sample into those classified as lower status and higher status, would you have different networks? In one in which you would see very pronouncedly the green way, he's strong, and in one way you would see the other. You know what I mean?
Well, basically, this is what I did here. So in the moderation that I estimated different networks, that included only the narcissism, the big five, and the ideological variables at the different levels of both the objective status and the subjective status. So different levels of envy and different levels of education, income, and so on.
Yeah, I need to think about it. I'll come back to you.
But yeah, I don't say that all of the middle class people are xenophobic and all of the lower class people are authoritarian. It's just like a regression that it works with means. And
yeah, so I think maybe it was more like the formulation that I think of it differently. And I know because there's like this, like relational class analysis where you would have different groups and then you would have different networks automatically for these different groups. And you could see if the lower status people have a different network, different associations than the higher ones. So this is, I think, where my thoughts are coming from. And for the other thing, which just in relation to this is also, have you looked a lot at the literature by Yetum? Because he talks a lot also about like why the high status people vote. Because they are not represented here.
And one question about this. So this is a very thin line.
yeah, I want.
Right.
So if I include here not the hatred but the sentiments towards immigrants, and then it's a
But network. Sorry, so the X hate. What is that? That's also xenophobia, but a more general.
It's condemn and hate read felt is the average of two really negative emotions, and there is a thermometer question about immigrants. So I had to choose that either I include the thermometer question, but that one is a manipulated one. So for some people it's about immigrants, others for refugees, others for foreigners. I don't remember what was exactly. Or this, and with the other one, the relationship was stronger, but with this, I felt that it's more methodologically, it's more valid, or I don't know.
Yeah.
But that for the other one, it's
this
a
one
nice paragraph. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
So you're using the cases data, right? The panel data. How many waves are you using?
Two. I mean,
Like how did you, for example, measure PR support? And like, is it in every wave?
no, it was the 2017 election. If at least one of the two votes forecasted.
Okay.
And most of the variables were measured right before the. I don't remember the end. I think the envy was measured few periods before, few waves.
So you used one wave? Is that correct? Two? So two.
So for the PRR vote,
Yeah.
I used in total, I think the variables were collected from 3 because some variables couldn't be collected. So collected from the one right before the PRR.
You only use a dependent variable from one wave.
Mhm.
Okay. No, so you can't really look at like changes in narcissism and changes in PR support.
No, because narcissism was measured once.
Okay. No, then never mind.
It's not only in one of all the.
Well, before the election and
Yeah.
after that, yeah. That was measured in 2020, I think, or something, but that was way after the.
Yeah, that's long.
Yeah.
There is one question Beth still has. Can you say something about the effect sizes? How strong is the association between narcissism or personality in general and PRR voting?
In the
Both.
So it's I think it was like medium effect size. So this is like these are beta regressions. So it's the predicted probability basically, and you can see that the lowest between the lowest and the highest, it's almost 50% in, for example, in the first one. So yeah, I would say that it's medium effect size.
Yeah. Thanks. Your final slide there, you show the effect of narcissism, and also there you have cynicism, right? And the effect of cynicism, sorry, agreeableness and narcissism, and the effect of cynicism remains statistically significant.
Mhm.
So you conclude that there is a separate path going through cynicism from disagreeableness. How is that different from the narcissism path? Could you elaborate a bit more on that, the separate theoretical mechanisms? Because I think it's interesting. You argue so there is a separate one that goes via cynicism, but what exactly does that look like?
I would say that the cynicism is more the anti-elitist part. So the I don't believe in the system at all. I feel anomie. I feel lack of trust in the system. And the rivalry is more the I would say the xenophobia, or the hating the minorities or disliking the minorities, and the vulnerability. I would suppose that it's more the economic vulnerability that translates into narcissistic vulnerability.
Yeah. So the political anti-establishment part, that's really still that's the cynicism part. That's not so much covered in the narcissism. That's the economic and cultural part, so to say, according to this reading.
Well, I think that there is an economic part, there is a nativist part, and there is a anti-elitist part.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the anti-elitist is the cynicism, which is, I think, but I haven't tested, but I think it's more closely related to the vulnerability. So I would suppose that people, for example, rural people who feel more distant from the elites, they score higher on cynicism, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Sorry.
I was just thinking about this because I think it would also be really cool. I mean, it's data from Germany, right? And whether or not it's true, a lot of people who voted for the AfD did claim as a kind of protest. And it would be great to show, if you could show that cynicism is more like this kind of, I vote for them once because I'm really pissed and I don't trust the elites, while someone who is narcissistic about their group might find a lot of building up self-esteem in their rhetoric and their ideas. So they might support them for longer. I mean, I don't have data for that also, but like this would, I think, like also really nice theory of why different personality traits might lead to voting for them once, while really identifying and maybe even engaging, being a member of this party, compared to just like, I hate the others. So
the latter part might be more difficult, but the first part, of course, you have panel data, so you could, of course, check that out.
So this one is about the experiment, I didn't say, but it's Dutch data. So the other one is so in the gases panel, the problem is that there is a 10-item big five before the election, and the big five, the large five, is measured after the election. So that would induce problems with endogeneity. But yeah, probably. But yeah, it's a great idea.
you just study and write a paper.
I think this is related to what you just said, but did you control for any like satisfaction with the economy or local trust?
No, we didn't. We measured only demographic variables and personality, including like authoritarianism, narcissism, and big five. So, well, the subjective status, different subjective status variables are maybe proxies, but yeah, but as we don't know what they measure, it's a bit difficult.
I got one more question. So how big were your treatment groups exactly?
600 something.
Both?
Mm-hmm.
I was maybe thinking like it could be a power issue, but it doesn't.
It shouldn't be.
Did you do a power analysis?
Yeah, well, it said that around 700 should be necessary. And we are still collecting data because it's a bit slow, but I don't have high hopes of getting significant results in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, there was also a related question that Beth asked. So why did the manipulation fail? Was there a control group? So can people not move up? So is it possible that people could not move up because of a ceiling effect? They're too high status. And also, were you underpowered? It's a question. So it's a, yeah.
Yeah, probably we should have done it with 100 ladder steps and not 10. And then
Yeah, because of the 1 to 10 issue for Dutch people. Yeah.
Or in general, maybe. So probably, yes, there was, well, not probably, that we can see that there was a ceiling effect because most of the people are in the top 3 categories. But the main problem, I think, is that people didn't, so most people just after the manipulation, they said in each category that we are 3 and from the 1 to 5. So most of the people just said that, yeah, more or less at the middle.
Yeah.
Whereas at the beginning, they said that they are at the top. So it's really even counterintuitive, or I don't know.
Yeah. Final question.
Well, the thing is that the baseline manipulation that I modified was basically think about people at the top of the ladder and write down a couple of sentences. And it actually worked for a colleague. And this is why I was surprised that this one didn't. But yeah, probably going back to some simpler method, or yeah, like increasing the number of ladders. Yeah, these are the 2 directions that I could choose.
Don't know anyone who's good.
You've also tried this.
I've tried this and
But the exact same, or?
the level one,
Yeah. But also with giving the average and then.
Exactly, with
Okay.
or like average, or like you're a bit above or a bit something like this, and it doesn't work. What worked a bit better is really asking people to consider what might be leading to them falling from stages, and just making it aware that potentially you can fall.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I know there are published things on it, but for me it doesn't work.
You know, this is again an advertisement for open science, right? Probably the 2 articles that were published that found an effect, and then we have 200 of them that did not. Yeah.
You're not alone in this.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks all, and also for the people online. Beth, thank you for your questions. I think I will thank your sponsors. I will try to do it. I think the ERC, NWO, Politics and the Life Sciences, the departments over here. Is that it, Beth? More or less? Cool. This was the last meeting of this academic year, and we will be back in September. You will hear from us. We will have a completely new crew by then. And I wanted Beth and Gijs to buy you some beers here and give them to you to thank you for the Hot Politics Lab meetings this year. But yeah, you will get it from me later. Thank you very much for organizing. So I think we should also thank them. We will go for drinks, have fun at home with the kids or not, and see you later. And thank you. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.